Hey guys, Greg here. This is another episode of How I See It, our interview series where I sit down and I talk to guys who are relatable and credible and aspirational and really exemplifying maximizing midlife and what that looks like and lives like and how they can share their stories and perspectives, insights, and experiences with us that help us get better. And that was a lot of what came up in this conversation with Jerry Colonna, who is the founder of Reboot and also the author of the book called Reboot. And for over 2 decades, Jerry has been dedicated to the proposition that work should be nonviolent to the self, nonviolent to the community, and nonviolent to the planet. And we opened with that, specifically what it means to be nonviolent and what that really means by that. Jerry's a coach, he's a writer, he's a speaker. He focuses on leadership, business, the practice of radical self inquiry. And Reboot in Jerry's work is really born from the rallying cry that work does not have to destroy us. Work can be the way in which we achieve our fullest self. We talked about that process. We talked about that level of honesty. We talked about growing up and what it really means to do the work. That definition of success and accomplishment, which so often takes over for us as men. Do we focus on fixing the system or fixing us as individuals or both? Is it just rich guys complaining about being miserable after they've chased all these things and gotten everything they so-called wanted and find themselves unhappy? But then they have the time and the resources and the runway to just work on themselves. Would you have done it any differently? Touched on our kids, Jerry becoming a grandfather, the notion of release over reinvention, and the big question of how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? And that's a lot of what we do here at Midlife Male in different ways, but essentially around that very question. How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? So here it is, this week's episode of How I See It with Jerry Colonna. Jerry, good morning. It's good to see you. Welcome to Midlife Male.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's good to see you as well.
Well, I appreciate you spending some time and sharing how you see it. I wanted to ask you first on here, uh, this notion or this dedication to the proposition that work should be nonviolent to the self, nonviolent to the community, and nonviolent to the planet.
Hmm.
What does that mean exactly to you? What does this notion of nonviolence mean?
Well, let's take a step back. I don't know for sure about your past, but I'm imagining, since we're kind of roughly similar ages, we or may not have had fathers or uncles who went to work, who lived work as a kind of man in the gray flannel suit. There's an old reference. Kind of dreadful drudgery, where work was this slow death, where you may have put hash marks on the wall to mark the days until you retired. And then you died. I don't think work needs to be that way. I don't think we need to have that kind of relationship to work. So when I talk about violent, I talk about a slow violence where people bypass their own fruition, their own growth, and end up in a depressive state. That's at the individual level. When you give someone like that, someone who is working through, let's call it, childhood wounds, and you give that person power, they often create violent systems at work. And then lastly, when you give that person that power and they create organizations where violence is a kind of that slow degradation, then they care less about the community and the planet. My teacher, friend, and mentor, Parker Palmer, says violence is what we do when we don't know what to do with suffering. And so if you put those two notions together, I'm equating violence with suffering.
What's an example, if you can provide, of a violent system in your work, so we could be, maybe if aware of it, or see, or a sensibility of what.
Sure. Do a survey of any modern corporation and look at what we call an engagement survey, and you see levels of unhappiness. But here's a specific example. Many years ago, I was on CNN. I was interviewed for a special report they were doing on depression and mental illness in Silicon Valley. And I famously made the reporter cry. That's okay, because she's still a friend. Because I asked her penetrating questions about why she was doing this story. And about a week or two after the news report ran, I got a phone call from the head of learning and development at one of the largest software companies in the world. And she said, we need to get you in. We need to get your kind of thinking in. My senior leadership team is really struggling. And I said, well, hold on. Your company has a really good reputation, right? You have meditation rooms in all your buildings. You have these wellness retreats as part of the company. Why do you need me? And she said, yeah, if anybody uses those meditation rooms, they get fired. And she said, even more, she said, healthcare claims for depression and anxiety for the children of senior leaders at that point were up 35 to 40% year over year. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about when we create organizations where you would get fired if you seek help, or where those who have power, the most power in the organization, go home and they're struggling, and their struggles may in fact infect their children. I don't know any business plan that says, oh, and as part of our strategy plan, we're going to disrupt the lives of children. And yet this happens all the time. The story I just told you, your listeners will know, because they'll have worked for companies like that.
I think most men have at some point in their life. I know I have on more than one occasion, directly and indirectly in there. When did you come to this realization or this conclusion? In your career, I mean, you've had a career in finance and in VC and large. Did you experience this also yourself? Was there a tipping point moment for you? Did you stay in the system like that, or try to change the system?
No,
I threw get involved in that too.
No, I threw a brick through the plate glass window of the company. Let me back up and talk about an observation that you just made. You said most men feel that way. And I know that this is the Midlife Male podcast. We're talking about it. So we'll speak about it from a gendered identity place for a moment. There's a statistic I've heard, and I think it's Terry Real who's written about this, that depression is the number one cause of death for men aged 35 to 60. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Depression is the number one cause of death for men aged 35 to 60. Okay, trigger warning, I'm about to curse. What the fuck are we doing? What the fuck are we doing? Okay? So, yeah, you're right. Most men. So, why is it that we can identify most men? And let's be clear, this is happening for those who identify as female as well, but it's different. And one of the ways I think it's profoundly different is that we socialize boys to identify success, to identify self worth with accomplishment. And there's somewhere in midlife where you wake up and you go, what the fuck happened to my life? I swore I wasn't going to fill in the blank. And now I find myself doing precisely what my father and his father did. Where's the trap? So that's the first thing I want to say. I want to go back to your question. Look, I famously, and I say famously because I've been talking about it now for 20 years, had my early precocious midlife transition moment start in my late 30s, where the entire house of cards that I had built for myself, and the cards were gold plated, they looked beautiful, they were great. But the house of cards I had created in my 20s and my 30s began falling apart. I was a successful VC. I outwardly had an enviable career, and I was fucking miserable. As I often say, the outer me and the inner me were at cross purposes to one another. Because the more success I had, the worse I felt. And I hit the pause button hard at 38. I walked away from a job at JP Morgan. My former wife and I had a conversation, and I remember her saying, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. But for the first time since I was 13 years old, I was not going to have a job, which, based on the way I was socialized, for the first time since I was 13, I was not going to have an external metric of my self-worth. And it was scary. But it was the most important thing I ever did in my life, aside from being a father.
So how do we fix it or address it? Do we address it with the man? Do we fix the man? Do we fix the system? Do we fix both or try to? I mean, I know what I did when I felt just like what you described.
Yeah.
Like listening, okay, all the trappings and metrics of success from the outside looking in.
Right. Right.
Partner in the big company, multi-million-dollar book of business, all the other stuff. We're in different industries and so on and so forth in there, but the same thing. Hit 47 and go, okay, like I'm miserable in here. Is this what it's going to be? And, in my case, I've talked about I was the same age as when my dad died.
Yep.
So where do I go from here? Do I want to squander
Right.
these years ahead or not? And I had a coach around that time. It was the first time I got a coach, first time I'd ever asked for help to try to not blow it, basically. And, one of the things that he had said to me was, you can't change a system that is not open to change. I was one of a number of partners at the firm. If you have a majority of the partners that feel one way and one guy that feels a different way, you're going to have some trouble changing the system, if you will. And at the same time, couldn't afford to necessarily just leave at that particular moment. give up the equity, all the other, cut it out, not have anything to start over with. So I'm interested in your perspective on, what do we address first, if there's a first or an order, because I do think also that I'll only speak for myself here, but I think this is applicable. A lot of guys feel very trapped also. And what they want to do, if they're looking to redefine success or accomplishment or change things, uh, they still feel trapped in the overhead. They have to earn. They don't have another idea or job to follow the passion. They are married. They do have the kids, so on and so forth. Um, I'd love your insight on it.
So you've both made a number of observations and asked a number of questions in that. So I'll try to address some of it. Your first question was, well, how do we address this? Do we work at the individual level? Do we work at the systemic level? And then you referenced your coach. And I want to point out something that you said, which was, it was the first time I ever asked for help. So let me reflect back. You were 47, and it was the first time you ever asked for help. Where did you learn that? Or from whom did you learn that?
It's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before.
Okay, answer it.
Yeah.
What were the belief systems that might be implicit in that? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'm going to say I don't know, actually.
It just was always the case.
Yeah, it was a point in my life where I knew what I was doing and what I was feeling was not
Mm,
working. And if it wasn't working, I needed to try something different. So if I had never worked with anybody, never asked for help before, it was as simplistic as it was, let me try the opposite because what I'm
okay.
doing now isn't working.
So mazel tov for making that uh, leap. What I'm really curious about, and you can hold it rhetorically, is because it felt like a natural part of you, what that tells me is that somewhere early on, like really early on, what you learned was don't ask for help. Greg, you're not alone. We go back to Terry Real's assertions about men in depression. The title of his fabulous book is I Just Don't Want to Talk About It. It's the same, it's a cousin of the same mindset. I'm 47 before I learned to ask for help. Okay. Again, going back to your question, how do we fix it? Before we hit record, or maybe just at the beginning, you mentioned that you have a son. Does your son know how to ask for help?
I hope so.
Right.
I believe so. I'm going to ask him
Yes.
specifically,
Yes.
them both specifically.
Because I'm going to push back on something your coach said to you. Your coach said you can't create change. You can't change a system that isn't open to change. Okay, I'm going to push back slightly. You can't change a system that is made up of individuals who themselves are not open to change. The way systems change is at the individual level. That is the only way change happens. What are the ways in which the lessons what are those lessons that we
Jerry?
Oops. Sorry about that. Starlink collapsed.
You're back. Where you froze up was where you were saying you were going to push back
Yeah.
on my
I'm going to
former
push
co-host
back
a little bit.
uh, on his assertion. He said something to the effect is you can't change a system that isn't open to change. And I would argue you can't change a system in which the individuals in the system, especially those who hold power, are not open to change. And so the question is, how open to change are we? How willing are we to push back on things? And I get it. I'm not naive. I know that the kinds of things that this calls for might disrupt my ability to provide for my family, to provide for myself. But there are all sorts of mechanisms that and belief systems that we develop as children, each of which is designed to keep us safe, that in a sense promulgate and maintain this resistance to change that we've been talking about, this lack of openness that we're talking about. And the question I would put to anybody who is in a system like that, it's the same kind of question that I would put to you, which is your son, does your son feel like he can ask for help? What are the conversations that we need to have as fathers and, as of 2 weeks ago for myself, grandfathers?
Congratulations, Mazel Tov.
Thank you.
Well,
What are the conversations that we're not having that we need to have to support the kind of resilience that leads to nonviolent to the self, nonviolent to the system, nonviolent to the planet? Or to use Parker's words, what kinds of conversations do we need to have where we teach our children how to deal with suffering? Which, by the way, includes one way to deal with suffering is to ask for help. Do you see how it connects?
is there a way to approach that with your kids? Did you recommend or have experience with? I don't know. I can directly ask both of my boys if they feel comfortable asking for help. I don't have any hesitation around asking that question. I don't want to overall. But I think I'm curious, is there a certain way that you would approach it or advise other men, including myself, of how to approach these conversations with our kids? My boys, for example, are not boys anymore. They're 19 and 22. They're
Mm.
young men. And raising capable, sensitive, vulnerable, yet confident enough to ask for help young men. These are important values and characteristics. And for me, breaking a bit of a cycle of dysfunction
Mm-hmm.
is is a priority. Let's just, to put it mildly, is a priority so that they wouldn't get to 47 and have that be the first time that it occurred to them that they even could, ask for help. But I think there's
Right.
a
So,
population again of guys out there that not only haven't asked for help themselves, they're uncomfortable even having the conversations of asking people that they love and care about whether they feel comfortable with it too.
I think you're right. And I'll go back to the first part of your observation question. I think that talking about things, sharing, um, asking questions is a really powerful tool. But you know this as a father. Our children learn more from watching us than they do from listening to us. And so the question I would ask people, and I ask a lot of these types of questions in my first book, Reboot. What kind of adult would you like your children to be? Because you have to be that adult today. So I think you did something really important when you were 47. Probably even a little bit before then, when you started sort of searching for a coach. Because at some level, you knew that the system you were using wasn't working. And rather than doubling down and trying harder, you did the wise thing and said, I need to find a different way. Do the boys know that story? Yeah.
Yeah, unequivocally, the answer to that one is yes. Um, Now we're at an interesting juncture where they may know too much. I don't know, or how much that I put out there and talk about, and now how
Mm,
far you said to the other extreme you go in
mm,
terms of putting yourself out there and speaking and being open on all of these things. But I want to ask you also about that because I believe this, what you just said also. The children learn more from watching, than the talking or anything else you can say to them, not the, do as I
mm,
say, not as I do, but rather, hey, just watch me, do as I ideally, if you are living a certain way. When I was drinking, they saw me drinking. They don't
mm,
see me drinking anymore. And
mm,
when I was drinking, I wasn't in great shape. I'm not drinking, I'm in great shape. I'm exercising,
mm.
living by example, I think, for yourself. And ultimately, it helps you show up better as a husband and as a father and as a provider and that example. I'm curious. I don't think I'm alone here either with our children. What if our kids just don't do it? You're doing all these things by example, or you know, like you're seeing all this. Your mother is doing this, your father is doing this, and you know, maybe they're not grasping it, or they're not doing it, or do they don't have to be just like us. Right?
Oh, heavens no.
Right, exactly. And I don't want them to be exactly like us. I want them but this notion of living and leading by example, and they learn from seeing that, like, does that alleviate us a little bit from, like, we don't have to talk about things as much or acknowledge certain things as much. You can be seeing it, and then ultimately you have to build a life for yourself and make your own decisions. If you don't want to exercise, don't exercise. If you want to sleep in and we wake up early and you've been seeing this, we make certain foods. If you don't want to eat those certain foods, so on. I think those are pretty typical parental kind of struggles, and you hope maybe they adapt, learn, see, and maybe come around to certain things. But it doesn't mean they have to follow exactly what we do.
I think you just answered your own question. What if they don't?
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Yes.
No, but I let's reframe it just slightly. And let's go back to Parker's statement. Violence is what we do when we don't know what to do with suffering. You can even argue that depression and anxiety are a form of violence to the self. Okay. Um, there are other choices people have to deal with suffering. You mentioned drinking, for example. That was your way of trying to process and deal with a certain kind of suffering that you were going through. And the result was more suffering. How do your, and again, treat this rhetorically, how do your children deal with suffering? That's the question. Many, many years ago, when my children were tiny tots, and I went into psychoanalysis, my analysts used to say to me, give your children words. You're not going to prevent them from suffering. You just can't. The Buddha taught that life is filled with suffering. It's the first noble truth. And the second noble truth is that which we do to push away suffering increases suffering. Drinking, not talking about it, oversharing, all the things that we do to push away that suffering increases suffering. Buy a fancy car and it gets scratched. Fuck. Right? The only thing that's available to us is what the Buddhists would say is compassion. And I like to define that word as calm, to be with, from the Latin root, passion, feelings. How are we to be with suffering? We're supposed to be with it. Yes, we may model something and they don't follow our lead. Can you withstand that? Can you watch? I mean, this is an essence of parenting, right? Can you watch your child drive down the road and smack into the guardrail? Fuck. But thank God there's a guardrail. I think I am responding to your question.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned early on about success and accomplishment. You know, that we're conditioned to chase success, and success being, I think I get this right, is defined, you know, as accomplishment. It could be salary, it could be title, it could be, you know, money overall. And I think there's a point where guys get to also where they've done that. They've accomplished the salary, the title, maybe the fancy car that gets scratched, and they go, oh, fine. And they realize it's not happiness, or it's not enough chasing the hit song, like my friend Billy says, versus the hit life. And then they start to make change, if they're fortunate enough to make change. But there's a part of this where I think it's important to talk about, where, well, is this rich guys complaining? Okay, rich guys who have gotten everything they so-called want.
Rich, powerful, privileged,
right,
white,
whatever you want to call it.
cisgender, right,
Yeah.
all of it.
They get everything they want, and then they're miserable, and then they seek out going to fix it, and they have all the time and money to go out and fix it. So is rich and miserable better than poor and miserable? Or if I never chased achievement, or we change this definition of what I'm supposed to go after, could I wake up at 47 and not have accomplished or achieved anything and feel like I've missed even the chase and the struggle and the suffering, and now I don't have anything to show for it, really? Or, hey, I didn't like it. It didn't get me to feel what I wanted to feel, but you know what? I've got all the time, money, runway in the world to now try to work on this and work on myself.
Well, again, that's a multi-part, multivariable observation. The first thing that occurs to me is on the question of, say, our privilege, the capacity even to lament, and let alone have the capacity to pay for a therapist or to pay for a coach or to pay for it. That privilege does exist in the world. And I know I have that. I had that ability at 38 to say, I'm not gonna work. And since I have that privilege, I feel a great moral responsibility to, as my Midwestern wife would say, put my poop in a group and not spread my toxic wounds around other people. And so I therefore have a greater responsibility to do a certain kind of work than I might otherwise have. That comes along with the privilege. Because I have power by dint of the body that I occupy. So I damn well better get my shit together in that regard. The second thing that occurs to me is, this question about success. And I often turn back to a quote from William James, the father of American psychology. And James said, "It is not failure that annihilates us. It is when we attach our sense of self-worth and self-esteem to accomplishment of a goal and then fail to achieve the goal that we are annihilated." I think we go back to this whole question of how do we define not a successful life, but a worthwhile life? You want to hear a crazy situation that we have in our society today? We blame poor people for their poverty. We blame people who struggle for their struggle. This too is a consequence of privileged, powerful people not getting their shit together. We blame the negative outcome on the individual. Now, it's only through me looking at my complicity in systems like that enable me to begin to do the work to address change. You asked before, is it at an individual level or is it a systemic level? And you already know the answer. It's at both simultaneously. You can't hide behind the difficulty of changing at the system level and say, therefore, don't try. You have a moral responsibility to lean into these questions and to try, knowing full well that you probably will fail. Because that's the kind of elder that I want to be. That's my perspective from what I would say on the other side of the midlife transition. Because I'm 62 and I'm a grandpa. And I'm looking at people in their 40s saying, yeah, you got to do this work. That's what the midlife call is all about. Do the work. The subtitle of my first book is Leadership and the Art of Growing Up. Midlife is the time where you are called to grow up. Take responsibility for your own stuff and lean into making the world better for the next generation.
What does the work look like?
Mm-hmm.
I think we hear that a lot. Do the work. You need to, grow and do the work. And then the question I get from a lot of guys, and I've asked this too, what is the work? How do I do the work?
Mm-hmm.
I clearly haven't done the work. I've been doing a lot of work, but it's not the work you're referring to. And
Right.
again, they don't know where to start on this work or even to, I guess, determine from all of the availabilities and possibilities out there. And we're inundated now by the masterminds and the retreats and the books and the podcasts and everything. And I think that how do I curate in a way down to what work I should be doing, or even that first step of, I'll give you three choices, and if you pick any one of them, they're better and they're pretty good because what you're doing now is nothing, or something like that.
What's the fear behind the question?
That would do the wrong work. Maybe I'm afraid
Yeah.
of making another mistake. I'll pick the wrong thing.
I'll pick the wrong thing. What a waste of time. Okay. Do you hear the productive mindset that exists behind that? Do you hear the accomplishment orientation that's behind that? The Buddha once said there are 84,000 doorways to the Dharma. 84,000. Okay. My answer to that is I don't care which door you pick one. Okay. What is the work? The work is what I would call radical self inquiry. That's my phrase for it. And a good question to start with is my most famous question out there, which is how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? Right? That is the core operating principle. I don't like the situation I'm in. Great. How did it serve you? How did it serve you? Oh, well, it gave me a sense of affirmation. It gave me an ability to outdo my parents. It gave me the ability to live up to my parents' expectations. Great. Now, what has it cost you? Oh, it cost me my relationship with my spouse, or it cost me my health, or it cost me my mental health. Do you need to do it anymore? No, I don't. Maybe it's time to stop being on autopilot. Maybe it's time to not treat not just work as drudgery, but life as drudgery. I'm chock full of quotes. Here's another one. Blaise Pascal once said, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room with his thoughts. You want to know what the work is? Sit alone in a room with your thoughts. Don't wave it away as if it's unproductive. The inner life is the gold life. That's where the answers are.
You made a move from Brooklyn and where you were raised, and you now live in Colorado, right outside of Boulder.
Well, there were some places in between, but yeah.
But you've ended up, ideally, if we're bookending this, then from Brooklyn to outside of Boulder, and I love it. I love this. Just to lighten up, like I love when men and when families make a decision that they can actually get outside of either where they were raised, or there can be a different environment, and that we have again options and choices and possibilities on where we go and what we do. Walk me through a little bit, kind of, and including the in between, kind of how you got to where you are now and what that's meant to you.
You mean geographically?
I think the geographic move is kind of stimulated by a need for a different environment or a different lifestyle or a different way. Saying, okay, I mean, there's some people that live right nearby where they're born their whole lives, and it never occurs to them that they could go somewhere else. They talk about it a lot, but they don't actually.
Well, I was never that way. When I was a boy, my mother used to call me Captain Fleetfoot because even as young as 5 years old, the question around the table was always, where's Jerry? He's out somewhere. I don't know where he is. Where did he go? That said, Brooklyn is never really far from where I exist. It's a mindset for me as much as anything else. And my 3 children all live in Brooklyn, and I just rented an apartment. So when I go back to New York, I'll be staying at a place in Brooklyn. For me, I left the physical location of Brooklyn early on in 9th grade. We moved to Queens, and then I commuted back to Brooklyn to go to high school, and then I went to Queens College and eventually got married and eventually moved to Long Island. And so I was always in the New York metropolitan area. various locations. But at a profound moment in my own midlife transition, I started coming to Boulder on a regular basis, both for the Buddhist community and for the technology community that exists here. And one of my dearest friends lived here, Brad Feld. And so I started coming back and forth. And what I experienced was to be able, like this afternoon, when my calls are all done, even though it's cold out, I'll go for a hike because it's that kind of a place to live. And I appreciate that. But there are many, many sides to me, including the side to me that last week I was in New York and just navigating the city the way I did when I was 13 years old, hopping on a subway, popping up in a different location, doing different things. So it has never felt like I was escaping. That the escape was from a family dynamic, not from a physical location.
What do you do for fun?
I have a blast. I think I have the best life in the world. So I do a lot of things. I read, I watch movies, I hang out with my kids. I'm married to a beautiful woman who is a joy in my life, my co-founder in the company. And the most meaningful, purpose-driven part of my life is my work. You know, this is a proposal for a third book. It gives me pleasure.
What are we talking about in the third book? You know, the reboot being.
Oh, I'm not talking about that yet. Nope.
I can ask you. You told me I could ask you anything, so that it's fair to say you
Yeah,
don't
no,
want
I
to talk
would say,
about it.
yeah. No. As my therapist once said, don't take the lid off the rice pot. The rice is still cooking.
And that's what your days look like now.
What do you mean?
Facilitating, coaching.
I don't do much facilitation, but my days are, I've been on the phone. It's now 11:45. I've been on the phone since 7. And I had a client that I was talking to in the UK this morning. And yeah, my day is, to put it another way, my days are filled with thoughtful, meaningful conversations where people grace me with meaningful stories about their hearts. I am the luckiest man on the fucking planet. Yesterday I met someone who's probably going to become a new client. It's rare that I take on a new client, but I just fell in love with this guy. And he sat in my office in Boulder and he just told me an incredible story of his childhood. And what an honor it is to be someone who holds those stories. That's the most important thing I could do other than being a father and grandfather.
When you say it's rare that you take on a new client, do you have like an operating system of your own or a thesis around like, hey, here's how many hours I want to put towards something, or here's how many clients I want to have? Because you're not financially driven, but you've built a very prominent practice, business. You're called to your work. I'm just curious around how you say yes and say no. Is it just what you said? I was fascinated. I was drawn to this guy. And
at this point, I have the privilege. Yeah, at this point, I have the privilege of saying yes in those kinds of circumstances. And I usually maintain about somewhere between 35 and 40 clients with whom I speak, usually every 2 weeks. It's very difficult. Either I'm a terrible coach or I'm a great coach because clients tend not to leave. I'm teasing. It's very difficult for me to to take on new clients on a regular basis. I feel very fortunate that I'm surrounded by 10 amazing and amazingly different coaches that are all part of the team here. And that's great. So,
What should men be looking for in either a coach or the process of finding somebody to work with for them?
I think that they should be looking for a feeling. I think that they should be looking for the feeling of being understood, being valued, being held accountable, being held accountable to their own objectives. Someone who will be fierce and caring all at the same time, who coaches from a place of their own scars, who has done their own work. Too many people call themselves a coach and actually have not completed their own process of growing up. And those folks are dangerous.
What is that? Define growing. What does that mean to you, especially for men in middle age who thought maybe they already have? So not just the coaches who may not have, or the coaches who haven't done the work and haven't done their own growing up, and everyone's calling themselves a coach right now, but even just the men that fall in this
Yeah.
window. And I'm not saying it's just an age specific thing. I think we hit it at all different times, but it's like they feel like they have grown up. And we're like, no, like, what does it mean to you?
I can't tell if someone external to me has completed the process of growing up or not. I can only look at the external behavior, and I can only make the references that I was talking about before. The truth is, this process, the last line of my first book, Reboot, is, and with that, I mastered the art of growing up. What I like to point out is I did not write, and with that, I grew up. And the point of the distinction is that the art, not science, of growing up is actually a continuous process of lived experience. This is a mindset that will stay with me forever, which is every single day I struggle to grow further. Every single day I struggle to become what I often describe these days as the ancestor my descendants deserve. Some days I make progress with that. Some days I take 2 steps back. That's what growing up looks like.
Where is the grace in this? Maybe the grace and the gratitude and the latitude during the process where we stop being so hard on ourselves.
Well, I think one of the dangers of my infamous question around complicity is that people misinterpret it as how have I been responsible for everything that's rotten in my life? If I had meant that, I would have written that sentence. That's not what I meant. You call it grace. I would add to the word grace curiosity. And in both instances, we're talking about being self-compassionate. I think the grace lies in that curiosity. Oh, look at me. I lost my temper last night. I wonder what was going on for me. I wonder, maybe I was under-resourced. Maybe I had a memory that got triggered. Maybe I just wasn't my best self. I wonder why. Apologize if you've hurt somebody. That's what grown-ups do. But then get curious. What is going on for me? I have a friend who's in his mid 80s who just re entered therapy. Mid 80s. He doesn't shut down and say, okay, I'm done. It's just like, I got some things I want to work on. That feels like the pathway to a well lived life. That feels like the pathway to becoming an adult at 85.
So it's the continuation of the learning, the continuation of the curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
The
What's the point of living if you're not going to be curious anymore? I mean, to me, curiosity it's everything.
What are you most curious about now?
What's it going to be like to be a grandpa? I mean, she's 2 weeks old. What's that going to be like? Holy moly. Am I prepared? I don't know. Will I be her ancestor in the way I would like to be? And what do I have to do to become that person? What kind of grace do I have to have? What kind of forgiveness do I have to hold? What kind of presence do I need to have to be the person that I want to be?
Do you write those things down? What,
I journal every day. I have lots and lots of dialogue about those issues. But a lot of the issues that we're talking about are part and parcel of everything that I write, whether it's essays. I've got this newsletter on LinkedIn that's growing and it's kind of fun, or in my books. I mean, this proposal, which should go out next week, has 12 chapters. So there's a lot I want to say in this next book.
did you always want to be a writer or see yourself as
Oh,
a
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. As far back as I can remember. I remember when I released Reboot, I remember describing it. I felt like there was this rubber band that had been stretched back, and then finally, pop, I released it. And like decades of wanting to put words together in such a way that it would move people were released. And the response I got to Reboot, I mean, it still startles me. I mean, I wrote about this in Reunion, the second book. So many people have read that book and said, your story is my story. I tapped into some universal experiences that I just did not expect. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I did a podcast conversation for our podcast with a young guy I think he's 30 years old, and one of his investors had given him Reboot to read, and he tells a story of just standing in the water off the coast of, I think, Majorca, reading the book and just crying. And then reaching out to me, and then he was just shocked because I responded. I mean, is there a better feeling in the world? I mean, you're an author, Is there a better feeling in the world than to have someone say to you, this book meant so much to me? God. It's incredible. So yeah, I always wanted to be a writer.
I appreciate this notion that you talked about release, in here. Because I've talked about that a lot too. I've been asked, or you've reinvented yourself, and I typically answer that I didn't reinvent myself, that I released myself. I
Yeah.
enjoyed hearing you say that this was always there.
Mm.
But that chase again of traditional success or achievement or accomplishment or the norm was just kind of held it back. At a certain point, it wasn't reinvention, it was release. It was that, you know, overall. And I think that's something that does get lost with a lot of guys, this notion that they have to reinvent themselves and I don't often think that that's the case as much as like you don't have to reinvent yourself. You do need to release yourself into who you are. You probably already know it. You do already know it. Reinvention sounds unnatural in a lot of ways. I have to do something that maybe is still not me.
Yeah.
Whereas
There's
release
a,
feels very genuine and authentic.
yeah, there's another frame which I would use, and I think it builds on your theme of release in that way. There's a wonderful book called Living Your Unlived Life by Jerry Rule and Robert Johnson. Robert passed away many years ago, but it's a really wonderful book. And there's a passage in there where they talk about men or people at midlife feeling this, like this discomfort, this unsettledness, I don't like my life, I hate my job, I hate my life. And their assertion is the unlived life is calling for them at that point. And I think in your quote unquote release, what you probably did, to use their phrasing, is found your way to the unlived life. See, this person that you are today, this is who you were meant to be. And 10 years from now, you may be somebody else. But right now, you're living that part of your life. When I was writing after 17 years as a coach, 18 years as a coach, the unlived part of me was finally released. And part of that growing up process is to allow the unlived parts of ourselves to come in and to allow ourselves to be more full.
Jerry, this was great. I really appreciate it. And that's a ideal place to sit and ponder and take it all in. You shared a lot. I learned a lot, and I greatly appreciate your time and your work. It's making a big difference. You know that.
Thank you, Greg.
You know I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your saying it. Thank you. And thank you for holding space on the conversation. It was an important conversation.
No, well, thank you very much for that. I will say also, my mother went to Queens College.
Ah,
I
that's
grew up
great.
I was listening to I grew up on Long Island in Great Neck.
Mm-hmm.
So you're
I
our
know it
son's in
well.
Boulder right now. We're looking at those areas in and around, in and around Boulder and Colorado too.
Yeah.
So at 52, about to be 53 this month, and I look to men like yourself, who
Mm.
are living and leading by example, and who are out there and doing the work, continuing to do the work, have done it, as inspiration, and
Oh, well, thank you for saying so. And yeah, I know Great Neck quite well. So
yes, and when I have mutual friends like John Windsor and Chip Connolly and men like you,
mm,
like I look to you guys to say, okay, like there's a lot to look forward to. And
yeah,
congratulations again on being a grandfather. I'm sure you will be wonderful at it.
let's hope so. Thank you, sir. You take
Thank
care.
you very much. All right, take care. I'll be in touch.
Bye.
Hey guys, Greg here. Thank you so much for listening and watching this week's episode of Midlife Males, How I See It with Jerry Colonna. Please, if you like what you have heard and seen here, please share it with your friends. Make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter. Just go to midlifemail.com. You can click the links that are on the screen here as well. Every week, we are committed to helping men maximize middle age, sharing stories, access, insights, our network, recommendations, interviews just like this. And I'm deeply grateful and appreciative of the 30 plus thousand men who are getting midlife male content every week and the millions of views that we're receiving on social media and hits through our website. We're really excited about what we are building and continuing to build more live events and experiences through our excellent adventures, deeper dives into what's important to us. Our new series, Midlife Lately, that I host every week with John Finkel, our editor in chief. So thank you for being here, and make sure that you keep living your best life, because you either define midlife or it defines you. See you next week.